What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today I've got a perfect Timmy build for you. Eshki is that perfect mix of playing giant creatures and having the ability to burn out the entire table without ever going to combat. So before we get into it, click on that whatnot link, get your free $15, get 10% off all of your Tolarian library proxies whenever you use code DT for D. And last but not least, let's talk about Eshki. Eshki is a very cool commander in Temur colors. She says simply, whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to put a 1/1 counter on her. If that creature's power is above 4, you get to do that and draw a card. And if that creature's power is above 6, not only do you get to put a 1/1 counter on her, draw a card, additionally, you deal damage equal to her power to the entire table. So again, this is how we're going to burn out our opponents. This does play a lot of massive Timmy creatures. Combat damage, winning through combat damage, is going to be definitely viable here, but there are some sort of combo-y things. If you get the right 3 or 4 cards on the battlefield, you are just able to recast creatures over and over again and burn out the entire table. We're not going to include tutors, and we're not going to exactly try for that outcome, but again, our commander draws us a ton of cards. So stay tuned, get into it. We're going to talk about all the niche scenarios that cause us to win the game out of nowhere, and again, we're just going to talk about a Timmy build. Let's kick it off by talking about the Power Matters cards that are going to directly synergize with our commander. Elemental Bond is a 3 CMC enchantment that says whenever a creature you control with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield, draw a card. And there's a plethora of cards like this. Gearhulk the Pack Leader, Gearhulk's Uprising, Outcaster, Trailblazer, Temur Ascendancy, there's no shortage. All of these cards are able to draw you a card whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield. Additionally, Outcaster Trailblazer has Plot, Gearhulk's Uprising gives all of your creatures trample and draws you a card when it enters the battlefield if you already control a creature with 4 power, and then Temur Ascendancy is going to give all of your creatures haste. Vaultborn Tyrant is one I'm especially fond of. This is a 7 CMC dinosaur with trample, and it says whenever Vaultborn Tyrant or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you get to gain 3 life and then draw a card. But what's really cool about this guy is whenever Vaultborn Tyrant dies, if it's not a token, you get to create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. This means we can sacrifice him to our Altar of Dementia or Greater Good effects to generate a token copy of him, and then we're able to cast him from our graveyard using other effects. Additionally, there's a ton of cost reducers in this deck, so 9 times out of 10, you're probably not even paying 7 mana for this guy. Dragon Champion is a 4 CMC creature dragon warrior with trample that says whenever a source you control deals 5 or more damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Not only does this synergize with our commander, it's kind of like a curiosity effect. We can cast a 6 power creature, then our commander deals 6 damage to all of our opponents, and we're going to draw 3 cards off of that. Additionally, he's very good with things like Terror of the Peaks, and also whenever we just deal combat damage, we get to draw cards. Shaman of the Great Hunt is one of my pet cards, and it's perfect in this deck. Not only is this a 4/2 for 4 mana, but additionally, he has haste, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a 1/1 counter on it, so it synergizes with the counters, makes our commander bigger, and then it has a Furious ability, so we can pay 2 and then a green and a blue to draw a card for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. I love this guy here. Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest. This one's a little more restrictive, but kind of has the same idea. For 5 CMC, you're going to get a legendary creature bird dragon that's a 5/5 with flying, and it says whenever Dragonhawk enters or attacks, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You may play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. So this guy's going to do increasingly more and more damage. Additionally, we do have a lot of ways to generate a ton of mana in this deck. We have a ton of cost reducers, so actually casting those spells is going to be pretty easy with a decent setup. And without a decent setup, you're not exiling a ton of cards, so it's just solid overall. Sarkhan's Unsealing is absolutely messed up in this deck. It's a 4 CMC red enchantment that says whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, Sarkhan's Unsealing deals 4 damage to any target, so we've got solid removal. It additionally says whenever you cast a creature spell with power 7 or greater, Sarkhan's Unsealing deals 4 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So now you've got a straight up board wipe whenever you cast any of these 7 power creatures we're about to talk about. Monstrous Vortex is also a super fun one I want to talk about here. It's a 4 CMC green enchantment that says whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, you get to discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. So now we're just straight up getting free spells whenever we're casting these bombs. Big Horner Rancher and Selvala Heart of the Wilds are going to allow us to tap for mana equal to the greatest power among creatures we control. Selvala is a little bit better because we can use mana of any type and she's only 3 CMC. Big Horner Rancher is 5 CMC, but still, just having the ability to generate that much mana is insane for the deck. Elena Kessing Trapper is a little bit different. For 5 CMC, you're going to get a legendary creature human scout with first strike that says add an amount of red mana equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn. She's going to be very important for casting multiple creatures per turn, right? Without all of our cost reducers and without getting set up, we're probably only casting 1 creature per turn in this deck, unless we have cards like Elena that are going to be able to catapult us into casting 2 creatures per turn, which can really be a problem for our opponents, especially when we're playing these massive bombs. Mark of Sakiko and the Reaver Cleaver are going to allow us to add mana to our mana pool equal to either the amount of damage a creature dealt or the power of a creature whenever it attacks. The only thing is Mark of Sakiko is a little bit more restrictive because it's only green mana, but again, it's only 2 CMC for this enchantment and the Reaver Cleaver is 3 CMC and 3 to equip, so we're going to definitely take it. Leafkin Avenger is super solid here. It has a tap ability that says for each creature you control with power 4 or greater, add a green mana, and then additionally it has an activated ability for 8 mana that says Leafkin Avenger deals damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. So if we buff this guy up, he can kind of end the game, but honestly, he's just a really solid mana dork in this deck. Temur Battle Carrier. This is going to be one of the mainstays of this deck. It's Temur to cast, and then it says during your turn, spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. Notably, that's not just creatures that get reduced, so it's insane here, especially when this creature herself is a 4/3. So if your commander's on the battlefield and you have Temur Battle Carrier, you're probably looking at a 2 cost reduction, and that's massive alone. And then once this deck gets going, you're basically only going to be paying the colored pips. Gwenna Eyes of Gia, super underrated in my opinion, and is probably going to be a staple in this deck. She's a 3 CMC elf druid scout that says add 2 mana in any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. She additionally says whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4 or 5 or greater, put a 1/1 counter on Gwenna Eye of Gia and untap it. So this is one of those scenarios where we can absolutely storm off. Just imagine Gwenna out with Temur Battle Carrier. Now we're only paying the colored pips of our creatures, and Gwenna is basically paying for 2 of those colored pips. So as long as we're casting something with only 2 colored pips and has above 5 power, we can kind of just keep casting spells. And then all of our card draw effects are triggering while that's happening, and it's finding us more creatures to cast. So this is kind of where this turns into a creature storm list where you're dropping 8 drops. Not okay. Goreclaw is going to help with the cost reduction. Not only does this reduce all of our creatures with power 4 or greater by 2, additionally, Goreclaw says whenever Goreclaw attacks, creatures with power 4 or greater are going to get +1/+1 and trample until end of turn. So someone's taking a lot of damage. Terror of the Peaks is going to see an include in the deck. This can just be a flat win con. Pair this with our commander and then storming off with these massive creatures and you're going to kill somebody. The Skullspore Nexus is very good in this deck. Not only does it kind of replace our creatures whenever they die, we are playing a lot of bombs in this deck that do want to get removed. So now when our opponents remove them, we get a giant dinosaur in its place, so we're gonna take that. Additionally, we can just use this to double our commander's power, and when our commander's power gets doubled, that means she's going to do twice as much damage whenever we cast one of these 6 power creatures. The Skullspore Nexus, for anybody that doesn't know, it does cost 8 CMC, but it gets reduced equal to the greatest power among creatures we control, so this is always going to be 2 CMC like the Great Henge. And then it says whenever one or more non-token creatures you control dies, create a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness equal to the total power of those creatures. And then it has an activated ability to pay 2 and double target creature's power until end of turn. Absolutely broken in the deck. Altar of Dementia and Greater Good, one of them says sacrifice a creature, mill cards equal to that creature's power. Then Greater Good says sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3 cards. We're going to talk about Altar of Dementia later in the deck. You're probably scratching your head right now, but that's okay. And then Greater Good is just good. Alright, I've kept you waiting long enough. Let's talk about those massive creatures in the deck. Animar, Soul of Elements. Now this guy is not massive by any means, but for Temur, we get a a legendary creature elemental with protection from white and from black, and it says whenever you cast a creature spell, put a 1/1 counter on NMR Soul of Elements. And then it says creature spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast for each 1/1 counter on NMR. Again, this guy and Gwenna go absolutely insane together, and this is just going to help us storm off with these creatures that cost a ton of mana. Dreamwake Tide is sneaky good in this deck. It's a 3 CMC 7/5 creature whale. It does have Vanishing too, so this creature is going to go away eventually, but it also has a cool ability. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, we get to proliferate. This means we can proliferate the time counters on this guy and keep him on the board basically indefinitely. Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. This creature is absolutely insane in the deck, and it is one of the reasons we are going to be running Altar of Dementia. Uro is a 3 CMC, 1 generic, 1 green, 1 blue legendary creature elder giant that says when Uro enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escapes. Whenever Uro enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life and draw a card. Then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Its escape cost is green, green, blue, blue, exile 5 other creature cards from your graveyard. So whenever we have Altar of Dementia on the battlefield, we're able to cast this guy, sacrifice him in response to his escape ability, and then mill 6 cards. That's going to allow us to pay his escape cost, which is exile 5 other cards from your graveyard, and then pay green, green, blue, blue. So now, essentially, we're always going to have a 6/6 in the graveyard to cast to trigger our commander. This is going to draw us 2 cards because he actually draws a card on ETB as well. The value here is going to be insane. You just have to find a way to generate the mana. And again, there's a ton of ways to generate 4 mana again and again and again in this deck that we are going to talk about later. The Foretold Soldier is a really niche card that's going to be amazing in this deck. It's 4 CMC, 2 generic, and 2 green. Creature, alien, zombie, soldier. That's a mouthful. It says the Foretold Soldier must be blocked if able. The Foretold Soldier can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. And then it says whenever the Foretold Soldier deals damage, exile it face down. It becomes Foretold. Then you can foretell it for 1 and a green. Foretelling a card does count as casting it, so now every single turn we get a consistent way to trigger a commander as long as our opponents have blockers. AC just seems solid here. 4 CMC, green, and a blue. Legendary creature Serpent. It says you may play an additional land on each of your turns, and it says whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, draw a card. Giant, massive 5/5, triggers our commander, gives us some card advantage, and ramps us hard. Goldlust Triad. For 5 CMC, you get a creature dragon with flying and myriad. It then says whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. It is a 4/3, so it's going to trigger our commander, and that's kind of what we care about, but also generating 3 treasures a turn while doing 4 damage to each opponent. I kind of like that in this deck. Evercoat Ursine. This is a weird card. For 5 CMC, we get a creature elemental bear that has trample, hideaway 3, hideaway 3. Hideaway, when this creature enters, look at the top 3 cards of your library, exile 1 face down, put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order, then do it again. Whenever Evercoat Ursine deals combat damage to a player, if there are cards exiled with it, you may play those cards without paying the mana cost. So now we're cheating massive creatures into play with a 6/5, so I'm a fan. Defiler of Vigor kind of adds to the cost reduction of the deck while making our creatures massive. This is a 5 CMC 6/6 with trample. It says, as an additional cost to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 green less to cast. If you paid it this way, this effect reduces only the amount of green mana you pay. So basically, it turns all of your green pips into Phyrexian mana and helps reduce the cost of all your creatures. And then it says, whenever you cast a green permanent spell, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So that's going to be absolutely insane for us and make our board state massive. The Maelstrom Wanderer. There is an infinite combo in the deck regarding this guy, but I also just think he's a solid 7/5 that gets us a ton of value. So for 8 CMC, 5 generic, and then blue, red, green, you get a creature that says creatures you control have haste, and then this creature has Cascade, Cascade. So you get a Cascade twice. What causes this guy to go infinite is Selvala Heart of the Wilds and Temur Sabertooth. Sabertooth. What's going to happen here is you can tap Selvala Heart of the Wilds for 7 mana, return Selvala back to your hand, cast Selvala again, and that's going to net you 1 mana. So you could do this again and again and again and again and again because Selvala has haste, and then you can cast the Maelstrom Wanderer an infinite amount of times as well. That's going to trigger our commander an infinite amount of times, and then that's going to kill the entire board. Again, we have no tutors to make this happen, but if you end up with this synergy on the board, you do just win the game. But I think that's totally fine. This is an 8 CMC Maelstrom Wanderer, a 4 CMC Temur Sabertooth, and then a 3 CMC Selvala Heart of the Wilds. Atali Primal Conqueror is also super messed up in this deck. This is a 7 CMC dinosaur that has trample, and when Atali Primal Conqueror enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast any number of spells from among the non-land permanents exiled this way without paying their mana cost. Remember, whenever we have huge cost reducers like Animar on the battlefield, then we have Gwenna on the battlefield, and maybe a Temur Sabertooth to bounce them back to our hand, this doesn't go infinite, but it is just a lot and probably will result in you winning the game. Not to mention we can flip this guy for 9 mana and then 1 Phyrexian green, and we end up with an Atali that's trample, indestructible on 11/11 with the ability whenever Atali Primal Sickness deals combat damage to a player, they get that many poison counters. So this can just kill somebody outright. Barbarigmos and Fib. Hear me out. I think this is sneaky good in the deck. For 2 generic and then Temur colors, you get a legendary creature Cyclops Homunculus. Whenever Barbarigmos and Fib enters the battlefield or attacks, you get to draw a card, and then you may discard any number of land cards. When you discard 1 or more cards this way, Barbarigmos and Fib deal twice that much damage to target creature. And it then has an ability for 1 and a blue to put Barbarigmos and Fib onto its owner's library 3rd from the top. So what my kind of thinking here is, you're going to have a 6/5 for 5 mana that you can cast over and over and over again that also has added utility in being removal for creatures. Additionally, if you stack this with 2 other card draw pieces, which one is your commander, one is Barbarigmos, you can kind of just put this guy 3rd from the top and then straight up draw him again. So that's also pretty cool for the Storm strategy whenever we're able to generate a ton of mana. Last but not least, I do want to pair this guy with Life from the Loam. Life from the Loam says return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. And then additionally, it has Dredge 3, which means you can mill 3 cards and then bring this to your hand and then recast it, right? So now we're able to consistently get 3 land cards back into our hand, trigger this guy, and now we're left with an insane card advantage engine that also gets rid of all of our opponent's creatures. Yes, it's mana intensive, but this deck does produce mana. Anzrag the Quake Mole is just straight up good here. This is a 4 CMC green-red legendary mole god. Whenever Anzrag the Quake Mole becomes blocked, untap each creature you control after this combat phase. There is an additional combat phase. And then for 3 generic, 2 red, and 2 green, we can make it to where Anzrag must be blocked each combat this turn if able. So now, boom, we've got extra combat steps. We're just going to win through pure combat damage. And then it's also just a 4 CMC 8/4 that triggers our commander pretty consistently. Virtuous Gearhulk is a 5 CMC artifact creature construct with trample that says whenever Virtuous Gearhulk enters the battlefield, we get to put 4 1/1 counters among any number of target creatures we control. 9 times out of 10, we're just throwing 5 counters straight on Eshki right here. So now our commander not only triggers drawing us a card, she gets a 1/1 counter put on herself and then 4 1/1 counters on herself. So for 5 mana, we're putting 5 counters on our commander and then drawing a card. I'll take that. 6 is also making an appearance here. This is a 3 CMC legendary creature Treefolk with reach. Whenever 6 attacks, mill 3 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand. And then it says, as long as it's your turn, long land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. This is insane with Life from the Loam because Life from the Loam grabs you 3 lands, and then you're able to discard those lands to cast any non-land permanent card from your graveyard. I also think 6 is just very good in the deck because people are going to want to remove our massive creatures. Well, now our massive creatures can just be casted again from the graveyard, triggering our commander more. Univil Unrest is perhaps one of the funniest cards in the deck. For 5 CMC, we get an enchantment that says non-token creatures you control have Riot. They may enter the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on them, or they can have haste. And then it says if a creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage damage instead. So now our commander, Terror of the Peaks, whenever anything's just dealing damage, boom, it deals double damage. This is going to kill the table extremely fast if they don't deal with it immediately. Eternal Witness has a solid ETB that just lets us grab a card from our graveyard and put it into our hand. Pair this with Temur Sabertooth, and again, you have access to your entire graveyard. Bane of Progress enters the battlefield and then destroys all artifacts, all enchantments, and then we get to put a 1/1 counter on Bane of Progress for each permanent destroyed this way. This doesn't trigger our commander because it's only a 2/2 whenever we cast it, but this card has won me games and gotten me out of so many sticky scenarios, I can't not play it in this creature deck. That's going to do it for today's deck tech, guys. As always, I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.